Donald Trump has just dropped a social truth post that is causing consternation amongst the pro-Russian crowd. Donald Trump has said that Ukraine has a path to victory in the Russo-Ukrainian war. I'm going to dissect that post right now, and this just correlates with what I've been saying in this channel pretty much for the last year since I started the separate geopolitics channel, and in fact I have a video from 7 days ago in which Russian ultranationalist Igor Girkin, who sits in a Russian jail as an opponent to Vladimir Putin, outlined more or less the exact same analysis. Let's jump into it and have a look at what Donald Trump has said and why it is causing so much controversy, and does this represent another flip-flop by Donald Trump and a 180-degree about turn. And Privyet from Odessa on the shores of the Black Sea. And let's take a look. So this is what Donald Trump wrote. After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine/Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing to Russia, so Russia has consistently been in a situation where its economy has been weakening consistently over the last 3 years, and I've alluded to that over a year ago, that the second half of 2025 is when they're going to really have a crunch, not just with their economy, but also in terms of recruitment and materiel. And we've seen recently that Russia has changed its tactics and is not using as much of its armored vehicles as have been before, reflecting the fact that it is running low on that type of materiel. And also they are now struggling to replace the number of soldiers they are losing on the front lines. Of course, they have solutions potentially to all these problems, but it is causing a big problem economically. So this is Donald Trump speaking. I think Donald Trump thinks Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. So let's have a look at this next clause. With the support of the European Union. Well, notice that he doesn't say with the support of the US, or with the support of the US and the European Union, or with the support of its allies. He was very specific, the European Union. To me, this is a way of Donald Trump saying that he's not going to support Ukraine any further, directly at least, and that is consistent with what he's been doing over the last, 9 months almost, since he was inaugurated again, and in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. So that would suggest the original form is 1991 borders, so not just reclaiming the territory they've lost since February 2022, which is about an additional 10% of Ukraine. They'd already lost de facto control over 8%, so think of Crimea, for example. So to go back to recovering all lost territory, which is the strategic goal as outlined by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. With the initial reaction to the invasion in February 2022, the goal of Ukraine was to survive as an independent state. But once that had been secured after a few months, Zelensky then outlined actually broader aims for the war effort, and they were inter alia taking back all occupied Ukrainian territory, including the territory has been occupied since 2014 by Russia. So to continue with this post, with time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, again, notice it does not say the United States, and in particular NATO. Okay, well, the US is part of NATO, so that's a little bit more ambiguous. The original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? So again, he says where this war started. Does he mean 2014, like would be consistent with what he wrote in the previous sentence? A little bit unclear, but okay, original borders, we're not talking about from where things were in 2022. Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. So I wouldn't say that Russia's been fighting aimlessly. They have had perhaps not very clearly delineated war aims, have been a little bit ambiguous, more to do with the domestic situation in Russia and maintaining power for Putin. So he talks about denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, all these other things, rather than saying what should be a very clear strategic aim, which is to take back political control of Ukraine, whether that means actually having to occupy, annex all of de jure Ukraine, or it means annexing and occupying part of it and then installing a pro-Russian government in Kiev or somewhere else Think of maybe France under occupation in World War II, where Germany didn't actually occupy the entire country. They had Vichy, which was a pro-Berlin bunch of collaborators who ran the rest of the country basically from Vichy. So he says that they should have taken less than a week to win. That harkens back to the original situation in February 2022, when most analysts, whether they were pro-Ukrainian or pro-Russian, expected Russia to win very quickly, maybe not in a week, but definitely, unless you're Scott Ritter, who I've often mocked on this channel because he said he would eat his tie if the Ukrainians were still resisting in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast 10 days later. And of course, it took, I think the Russians just managed to get to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast a week or two ago. So this is not distinguishing Russia, again, to continue with Trump's post here. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. So in these parts, Trump is clearly trying to insult Vladimir Putin and the Russian military by calling them a paper tiger, which to a certain extent is true. They're definitely not as strong as they make on, but this is normal in posturing. Obviously, they have not achieved their strategic war aims since 2022 with this invasion of Ukraine. They managed to occupy an additional 10% of the country, but with the exception of sacking Mariupol in the beginning, they haven't taken any significant population centers. So yeah, they have, you could call them a paper tiger, definitely compared to what people believed in February 2022. Let's continue. When the people living in Moscow and all the great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all of the other things that are taking place in their war economy, where most of their money is going to be spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form. Man, he doesn't stop. This whole one continues. I have to interject. So yeah, the economy basically is doing really badly in Russia. It's really starting to creak now, as was anticipated, at least by me more than a year ago. It would take that long for the economy to end up in a dire straits. The governor's central bank has managed to kick the can down the road long enough that now basically they've run out of road, and they have increasing inflation, stagnation of the economy. Basically, they've gone into recession already, and that's in spite of the fact that they don't have much unemployment. Because a lot of able-bodied men left when they had a partial mobilization in the autumn of 2022. Plus, so many men have volunteered for the military, and many of those are dead or are fighting, and then others are working in factories producing material for the war economy. But basically, that's pushed up the price of labor, and the economy is starting to get sucked into a crowding out effect, where basically the actual war effort is starting to take over most of the productive economy. And yeah, if you produce a tank, it looks great on a balance sheet. It's worth X million dollars or euros or rubles. But then it gets blown up in Ukraine by a FPV drone within a few weeks. And what is the net benefit of that to Russia? Not very much, especially if a few Russian soldiers were actually killed inside that tank. So yeah, it's basically a huge net loss. In the short run, it looks great on the balance sheet, but actually the war economy is just basically a huge expense. Wars are very expensive to conduct. So why anyone has bought into this idea that just because the Russians put on their balance sheet that their economy is growing, in inverted commas, that it's amazing strategic move to start a war, is beyond me. It's absolutely clear that wars are expensive and not very productive, especially if you're not acquiring something of value, which has been Russia's case. Pretty much 10% extra, 10 percentage points of Ukrainian territory that they more or less destroyed in the process and ended up with a bunch of pensioners as new citizens is not a net benefit overall. So let's continue with this very long stream of consciousness here, and only getting, let's see, he stopped. So great spirit and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. Okay, wow, that definitely is rather optimistic from to Donald Trump, and a complete 180. He was only, obviously, we remember that infamous diplomatic debacle in the Oval Office shortly after he took back the presidency, was inaugurated with him and the Vice President J.D. Vance, berating Vladimir Zelensky, saying that you don't hold the cards. Well, apparently now he believes that Ukraine does hold all the cards. And if he's talking about taking back more than the original territory, the 1991 borders, that would suggest some sort of secret, up until now, secret revanchist plot by Ukraine to actually maybe take back their historic territories, take back parts of Kuban, and maybe take back Belgorod. I don't know. Not expecting that to become a new war aim of the Ukrainians, but let's see, maybe in some sort of kind of fantastical scenario that could become possible. But it's probably just for dramatic effect, I would think, by Donald Trump. And to finish it off, Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act, as if the Ukrainians haven't been acting violently in the last 3.5 years. In any event, I wish both countries well. So funny that he spends most time, the entire tweet or post, trashing Russia, and then says he wishes both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. So basically he has outlined that instead of providing material or financial support to Ukraine directly, which was to serve a strategic aim, at least by the Biden administration, the Biden administration did not actually, at least that's my analysis, did not actually want Ukraine to win the war, but they also did not want Ukraine to lose the war, hence the phrase to support Ukraine as long as it takes. They wanted an impasse, which they achieved. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of that, considering there was, in my opinion, a huge opportunity in late 2022, early 2023 to actually help Ukraine win this war and take back all its occupied territory, at least up until Crimea, and then we could have seen what happened afterwards. But this policy by Donald Trump of not giving the aid directly, but basically getting NATO countries to purchase it and then give it to Ukraine, or keep it for themselves, I guess, is a way of funneling more support to Ukraine indirectly while having the cover of claiming he's not spending any money. He's actually making money out of the whole thing. One has to view that through the prism of what is the strategic aim of the United States, because if he is just kind of washing his hands of it, as it appears here, I mean, he hasn't said that Ukraine is going to, the United States is going to support Ukraine directly to achieve some sort of aim, whether that is to help Ukraine win, in inverted commas, in terms of reaching its outlined strategic aims, or something that is approaching that from the position that we have right now, or if it's to ensure that this war is still an impasse. That was the Biden administration's policy, it would seem in hindsight. Or if he weren't going to support Ukraine or even allow any weapons to go to Ukraine or any intel, it would be presumably in that case to help Russia win in some sort of fashion. So very interesting to see Trump do this about-face, volte-face. It happens that he met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday while they were, I guess, waiting, or maybe they were at the United Nations. I don't remember if it was on the sidelines or it was actually at the building, but there have been many speeches. Donald Trump gave one, very long one yesterday, which is a completely separate issue that, since this channel focuses on the Russo-Ukrainian war, we won't get into all the other things he said in his UN speech. But he met with Vladimir Zelensky, and one of the things that Donald Trump is, I guess, accused of is that he basically repeats whatever the last person he spoke to has tried to convince him of. So obviously, Vladimir Zelensky, when he met with Trump, was clearly trying to indicate to Trump, hey, or convince him, Ukraine has a path to victory. I've outlined that many times on this channel. And Donald Trump definitely listened to him this time, because he went and more or less repeated that, not just in a press conference, but we also see it written out formally and in the style that is consistent with how Donald Trump writes himself. It is possible that today Vladimir Putin gets on the phone with Trump and Trump says completely opposite tonight or tomorrow, because now he's spoken with Vladimir Putin. It could also be that by this kind of rhetoric, quite condescending rhetoric about Russia and the Russian economy and the Russian military, that he is trying to get a reaction from Vladimir Putin to make him come and speak to him again and maybe make some sort of concessions that he can get somewhere to maybe a cessation of hostilities here, and then declare that he's made peace and presumably try to pick up the Nobel Peace Prize, as he has often alluded to and other leaders also allude to that Trump deserves. We just don't know, but it is very interesting that he has decided to use this language. I went and had a look as to the reaction by many of Russia's supporters, and they are absolutely flabbergasted. There's absolute consternation amongst them. How could Trump say this and outline that Ukraine can win? Because my observation has been, whenever I've interacted or had a conversation, whether online or in person, with the kind of type of typical person who supports Russia in the West, when you tell them that Ukraine will win the war, they look visibly scared by the prospect. It's like their whole worldview is shattered by this possibility that they backed the wrong horse in the war. So it has achieved that. A lot of dismay, a lot of attacks on Trump all of a sudden, that he's a moron, that he's controlled by the deep state, that the Jews have got to him and now they want to repopulate the whole of south of Ukraine. Apparently, I saw some crazy conspiracy theories like that been circulated in these groups since this post by Donald Trump. Maybe they were there before and I've just become aware of them, but absolute mad stuff that has been sent around online to try to cope with this latest post. So, as a prediction, what is likely to happen if Donald Trump is to believe what he wrote here, right? And again, he may change his mind, flip-flop by tonight, by the time I even have this video out, but assuming that has not happened, it seems clear that the Trump administration's policy is to supply material and continue to supply intel via NATO to help Ukraine without really a very definitive end goal. He's now left it open that Ukraine can win, maybe even take back more than the de jure territory, or so I guess in some shape or form take Russian territory in the future. And basically he is not going to try to force Ukraine to completely capitulate. That seemed to have been the policy by the Trump administration since January, that they were basically giving all these concessions to Vladimir Putin and Russia, whether they're on the diplomatic front at the United Nations, inviting obviously Vladimir Putin to Alaska to a summit that didn't seem to actually achieve very much other than normalizing once again that Putin is a world leader that everybody can meet and speak with and even invite to their own countries. And looking forward, it means that Ukraine will have a certain amount of US support via other NATO countries. And in the meantime, Ukraine has built up its own domestic production of equipment and other military supplies for the war effort. They are getting increased support from their European allies as well. And most importantly, in the last 9 months since Donald Trump took over, Russia has made very, very, very little progress on the battlefield, and now they are in a worse position than they were 9 months ago because their economy is in dire straits. So drop your comments down below in the comments section. Let me know what you think about what Donald Trump has said, what you expect to see going forward, and any questions you have. I'm going to remain even more optimistic than I was. I'm going to be now more optimistic than I was even a week ago. This is the most optimistic I've felt from the Ukrainian point of view since, we'll say, early 2023. And it's something I have been expecting for the last year or so in terms of where Russia and Ukraine will be respectively towards the end of 2025. So on that note, I will say do pobачення. Got those Odessa vibes. We got fantastic weather here in Odessa. It's actually the last day of this kind of Indian summer, it looks like. And Slava Ukraini, do перемоги. And apparently, Trump also agrees with that last statement.